We're going to be talking about different types of data in this course. And if you think about the world around you, you'll see that we have some variables that take on a continuum of values, and they're quantitative. So one type of data consists of quantitative data, which take on numerical values. And we'll have another kind of data or another kind of variable, which is a categorical or a qualitative variable. So if we focus on quantitative variables right now, one of the things we might see with something like a level, we know that level can take on a range of values. So it's not that level has a value of 1, 2, 3, or 4. Levels actually take on a continuum of numerical values. In mathematical terms, we would think of those as real valued. Temperature is another example. And so you can see on this column here, we've got a thermocouple that's actually going into the tray and telling us the temperature of the liquid that's on that tray. So things like temperature, pressure, level, composition vary continuously. They're usually positive real values, but of course with temperature that doesn't have to be the case. It can be negative as well, depending on what the reference point is. Another kind of variable is an integer variable. So it's still numerical, but it takes on integer values. So it might be count of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And we'll come back to that as well, because quite often we'll use integers to represent numerically what are essentially non-quantitative type values. So that takes us to another type of variable, which is a categorical variable. And if we take a look at this panel here, one of the things you could maybe come up with is to say, what portion of the buttons are red? Or do I have red buttons or green buttons and so forth? So color is an attribute that will be considered as a categorical variable. It's red, it's green, it's white. Now, if you take a look even more closely at this panel, you can see that these toggle switches toggle between local control and computer control. So local control is where I'm making the adjustments myself by hand, and the computer is doing it. And that's kind of a logical or a state type of variable. And so one way of thinking of the data is that variable takes on one of two values. It's either local or it's computer. And so that's an example of a qualitative variable. But if you take a look more closely, you'll see it says 1 local, 2 computer. So one of the things we very often do in analysis is we would code this and say, this variable takes on 2 integer values. It's either 1 or it's 2, and 1 corresponds to local and 2 corresponds to computer. So really what I'm trying to get at is that we have variables that can change continuously over their domain of definition, like temperature or pressure. We have discrete valued quantitative data, like integers. I have 1, 2, 3, or 4 cars. And then we have qualitative data that are categorical, which, for example, could represent a logical state, local versus computer. But what you're going to find is that very often we code that when we take it back into the data analysis in terms of numbers. One of the things I'm going to really encourage you to do in this course is to take the framework that we're developing, the different types of data, the ways we can collect it, the implications for analysis, and the tools for analysis, and become comfortable in applying them to the world around you. So for example, if I take a look at this parking lot, I have examples of categorical data. So we can talk about car color, silver, black, red, and blue. And so those are attributes of a product. The product is an automobile. We can talk about count data. So I might take a look at the record here and say, I can see 1, 2, 3 Nissan products, and I've got a Honda, and I've got a Kia and a Volkswagen. So you can see how count data come up. But we can take it one step further. So if you were called upon to come up with traffic or pedestrian control strategies for the company that you're working for, you might say, I'm a chemical engineer, what can I do? Well, if you think about that intersection, it's essentially a tank. Cars come into it and leave. People come into it and leave. And so you can start thinking, you can see that we'll have quantitative variables like count data, because we've got numbers of pedestrians. You could think of qualitative attributes, like whether the person's young or older, whether they're mobile or need assistance, and those kinds of things. The other piece that you might notice is that we could think about that in an event-driven context as well. Meaning, for example, the event that somebody arrives at the intersection, they stay at the intersection, light changes, then they cross the intersection. So again, the point I'm really trying to make at is, in the world around us, there are many different kinds of variables and variable types that we can think of. Tools we're going to talk about in this course will apply to all of those.